In the vast, flat lands of Nebraska, where the wind whispered tales of hard work and endless skies, lived a woman named Mary Clancy. It was the year 1882, and folks often said Mary was as tall as a young cottonwood tree. She stood a full 6 feet and 2 inches, with shoulders broad enough to carry a heavy plow. Mary wasn't just tall. She was strong, capable of lifting sacks of grain that would make 2 grown men grunt and groan. Now, in a town where most men barely reached her chin, Mary Clancy was a sight to behold. Her presence was like a shadow stretching across the dusty main street, making even the bravest cowboys feel a bit small. When Mary walked into the general store, the shopkeeper would quickly straighten his tie and stammer his greetings. When she rode her horse, a giant mare named Bess, through town, the other riders would steer clear, not wanting to get in her way. It wasn't that Mary was mean or unkind. In fact, she had a kind heart, hidden behind her towering frame. But her sheer size, her booming laugh, and the way she could fix a broken fence post faster than any man in the county, well, it made them all nervous. The men would tip their hats quickly and look away, mumbling excuses about chores or needing to check on their livestock. They'd clear their throats and shift their feet, always finding a reason to be somewhere else when Mary Clancy was near. The younger lads, still growing into their boots, would sometimes try to joke about her, calling her Big Mary under their breath. But even their laughter would die out if she so much as glanced their way. It wasn't anger in her eyes, just a quiet knowing, a look that seemed to say, "I hear you, and I'm still standing right here." Most evenings, Mary would sit on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, alone. The silence around her was often a reflection of the silence she inspired in the town's men. They respected her, perhaps even admired her strength, but they certainly kept their distance. Mary Clancy was a force of nature, a mountain in a land of rolling hills, and no man in town felt brave enough to approach that mountain. One Saturday evening, the air in town hummed with excitement. It was the night of the big barn social at the Miller Ranch, a chance for everyone to forget their worries and dance until their feet ached. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm, golden glow over the hay-strewn floor. A fiddle player sawed away at lively tunes, his foot tapping a joyful rhythm, while a banjo strummed along, making the whole barn feel alive. Children chased each other, giggling, their laughter mixing with the cheerful chatter of their parents. Platters of biscuits, fried chicken, and apple pie filled a long table, promising a feast. Couples spun and twirled, their skirts swirling and boots thumping in time with the music. The energy was infectious, pulling everyone into its joyful current. Everyone, that is, except for Mary Clancy. She stood near the edge of the barn, a cup of lemonade held loosely in her large hand. Her best calico dress, usually reserved for Sundays, was crisp and clean, but it couldn't hide her impressive height and broad shoulders. She tried to smile, to look like she was enjoying herself, but her smile felt a little stiff, a little out of place. When Mary arrived, a hush had fallen over the music for a brief moment. Not out of dislike, but out of that familiar nervousness she always inspired. The dancing had quickly picked up again, but a small circle around her remained empty. No one dared to ask her to dance, though many a young man wished they were brave enough. She saw the glances, the quick whispers, the way people would look at her, then quickly look away. It wasn't mean-spirited, but it was there, a constant reminder of how different she was. She watched Mrs. Henderson, a tiny woman, being spun around by her husband, both of them laughing freely. Mary longed for that easy joy, that simple connection. But every time a man even thought about walking her way, he'd catch her eye, remember her towering presence, and suddenly find his boots needing to be retied or his partner's hand needing a tighter squeeze. The fiddle played on, the banjo plucked, and the dancers whirled. Mary stood, a silent monument at the edge of the merriment, a slight frown creasing her brow. The lively barn social, with all its warmth and cheer, still couldn't quite melt the invisible wall that stood between Mary Clancy and the rest of the town. She was there, but she was also alone, a gentle giant watching the world dance by. Her very presence, even in quiet stillness, made some folks feel just a little uncomfortable, a little less free to let loose. The music kept playing, a lively jig that made everyone's feet tap, but Mary still felt a pang of loneliness. She watched the couples, wishing for a dance, for a moment when she wouldn't feel so big. Just as she was thinking about slipping out the back door, a new face appeared in the barn doorway. He was a stranger, clear as day. His clothes were dusty, worn from long travel, and a wide-brimmed hat covered most of his face. He wasn't tall or broad like Mary. In fact, he seemed a bit smaller than the other men in the room. What made him stand out, though, was his walk. He moved slowly, with a clear limp in his left leg, as if every step caused him a little ache. And when he finally stepped into the brighter light of the lanterns, folk could see he only had one eye, the other covered by a faded leather patch. He was a drifter, no doubt about it. The kind of man who carried all he owned on his back, a silent soul passing through. He didn't make a grand entrance or call out greetings. Instead, he just stood there for a moment, letting his good eye take in the lively scene. His gaze swept over the dancers, the musicians, the food tables, and then, quite naturally, it landed on Mary. He didn't flinch or look away like the others. His one eye simply rested on her, calm and curious. Mary felt a strange flutter in her chest. She wasn't used to being looked at without a hint of fear or awkwardness. This man, with his quiet way and his travel-worn look, seemed different. He moved slowly through the crowd, his limp making his journey across the barn floor a little slow. No one paid him much mind. He was just another face, another weary traveler pausing for a moment of warmth and music. He didn't head for the food or the other men. With each slow step, he was making his way toward Mary. The fiddle kept its cheerful tune, and the dancers kept on dancing, but Mary's eyes were fixed on the approaching stranger. His name, she would soon learn, was Cole, and his arrival, quiet as it was about to change the tune of the entire barn social. He was a man who carried his own burdens, yet there was a steady strength in his gaze, a calm that made him unafraid of Mary's formidable presence. Cole finally reached Mary, stopping just a few feet in front of her. He wasn't much taller than her shoulder, and his dusty hat made him seem even smaller next to her towering figure. The music was still playing, a lively tune, but something in the air shifted. People had started to notice the quiet drifter's steady path towards Mary. Whispers began to ripple through the barn, like a breeze rustling through tall grass. Cole took off his hat, holding in his hand. His one good eye, a deep shade of blue, met Mary's. There was no fear in it, just a calm, steady light. Mary felt her heart thump a little faster. No man in this town had ever looked at her like that. He spoke, his voice soft, almost a murmur, but clear enough for Mary to hear over the fiddle. "Ma'am," he began, his gaze unwavering, "would you do me the honor of a dance?" The words hung in the air. The fiddle player, halfway through a lively tune, faltered. His bow scraped against the strings, making a harsh, sudden sound that cut through the music. The banjo player stopped plucking. One by one, the dancers froze in place. A few couples were caught mid-twirl, their smiles fading into wide-eyed surprise. Children stopped their games, their small faces turning to watch. The entire barn, moments ago filled with joyful noise, fell utterly silent. Every single person in the room was staring. They stared at Cole, the small, one-eyed drifter, and then they stared at Mary, the towering woman who made even the bravest men nervous. No one had ever dared to ask Mary Clancy to dance. It was unthinkable, a joke that only the bravest or most foolish would consider. A few men at the back, those who'd had a little too much cider, started to snicker. It was a nervous sound, unsure, but it was there. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A quiet drifter, a man with a limp and a patch over his eye, had just asked the biggest, strongest woman in the county to dance. The sheer nerve of it. The idea was so wildly unexpected, so out of place, that it felt like a moment frozen in time. All eyes were on Mary, waiting to see what she would do. Would she laugh? Would she simply turn away? Or would she, perhaps, do something truly surprising? The tension in the barn was thick, crackling with unspoken questions. The nervous snickers quickly grew into outright chuckles, then into a wave of laughter that swept through the barn. It started with the men who'd had too much cider, their faces red with amusement. "Look at that," one of them bellowed, pointing a shaky finger at Cole. "Little fella thinks he can wrangle a grizzly bear." Another man slapped his knee, roaring, "He'll be swept off his feet, all right, right off the floor." The women, though usually more polite, couldn't help but hide their smiles behind their hands. It was just too funny, too unbelievable. Mary, the biggest woman in 3 counties, being asked to dance by a small, one-eyed drifter with a limp? It was like a tall tale come to life, a joke waiting to be told. Even the children, picking up on the grown-ups' mirth, started to giggle, not quite understanding why, but knowing it was something funny. The fiddle player, still holding his bow awkwardly, shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. He tried to start the music again, but his hands trembled with laughter. The whole scene felt like a comedy playing out right in front of them. Folks whispered loudly, making comments meant to be heard. "He's got courage, I'll give him that," someone called out, followed by more laughter. "Or he's just plain loco," another added. Mary felt her cheeks burn. It was the same old story, just louder this time. She was used to being stared at, used to the quiet fear, but this open mockery, this laughter aimed at both her and the brave man standing before her, stung. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the shadows. She wanted to tell Cole to just go, to save himself from this embarrassment. But Cole didn't move. He stood there, hat in hand, his one blue eye still fixed on Mary. The laughter swirled around him, but he seemed not to hear it, or perhaps not to care. He simply waited patiently for Mary's answer. His stillness, his quiet strength in the face of such open ridicule, was a stark contrast to the noisy, mocking crowd. Mary looked at him, then at the laughing faces, and a spark of something new ignited within her. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a defiant kind of pride. The laughter was still ringing in Mary's ears, and the faces around her were still red with mirth. But as she looked at Cole, standing so patiently, so unafraid, a strange calm settled over her. She didn't want to shrink away anymore. She didn't want to let the town's jokes win. Cole had offered her something no one else had, an invitation given without fear. A slow smile, a genuine one this time, spread across Mary's face. It was a smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. She looked at Cole, then swept her gaze across the still laughing crowd. Her voice, usually a deep rumble, came out clear and strong, cutting through the noise like a bell. "Why, yes, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the barn. "I'd be honored to dance." The effect was immediate and astonishing. The laughter, which had been so loud and boisterous, simply vanished. It didn't fade away. It stopped as if someone had suddenly put a lid on it. A man in the middle of a belly laugh choked on his own breath, his face going from red to purple. A woman who had been giggling behind her hand dropped her hand, her mouth hanging open. The children, sensing the sudden change, quieted down, their eyes wide. The fiddle player, who had been wiping tears of laughter from his eyes, froze, his bow still. The banjo player's fingers stopped mid-pluck. The entire barn went utterly, completely silent. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, a heavy quiet that felt bigger than the barn itself. Every single person was staring, not with mockery now, but with sheer, open-mouthed shock. They couldn't believe it. Mary Clancy, the woman who had never danced at a social, the woman everyone was too afraid to approach, had said yes. And not just to anyone, but to the one-eyed drifter with a limp, the man they had just been laughing at. It was a moment that defied all expectations, a twist in the tale no one had seen coming. Mary felt a thrill, a little spark of joy, as she watched the stunned faces around her. For once, she hadn't been defined by their fear or their jokes. She had chosen for herself. Cole, for his part, simply offered her a small, gentle smile and held out his hand. Cole extended his hand, and Mary, with a slight nod, placed her large hand in his. His grip was firm and warm, not at all what she expected from a man who seemed so small. The fiddle player, shaking off his surprise, slowly began to play a waltz, a gentler tune than the lively jigs before. The banjo followed, its soft strumming filling the heavy silence. Mary and Cole moved to the center of the cleared space. For a moment, everyone held their breath. How would they dance? Mary was so much taller, so much stronger. Would Cole be able to lead her? Then they began. Cole, despite his limp, moved with a surprising grace. He wasn't trying to spin Mary or twirl her like the other dancers. Instead, he led with slow, steady steps, a rhythm that was all his own. Mary, in turn, matched him. Her powerful frame, which usually felt so awkward on a dance floor, seemed to find its own gentle flow. She followed Cole's lead, her steps sure and deliberate. With each step, with each turn, the old wooden floorboards of the barn groaned and creaked. It wasn't a soft sound. It was a deep, rumbling complaint, as if the very ground beneath them was trying to keep up. The lanterns hanging from the rafters swayed gently, their light dancing on the walls. The tables laden with food vibrated a little, and a few cups clinked together. A murmur went through the crowd, not of laughter or shock this time, but of wonder. They watched, completely captivated. Mary, who seemed like she could lift a small horse, was dancing with a man who barely came to her shoulder. And yet it worked. Their dance wasn't about fancy moves or fast spins. It was about two people moving together, finding a rhythm that belonged only to them. The floorboards groaned again, a deep, resonant sound that everyone felt in their feet. It was a testament to Mary's solid presence, her powerful frame, and the way Cole was able to guide her without a hint of struggle. There was something almost comical about the shaking floor, yet no one laughed. Instead, a strange mix of awe and quiet respect began to fill the barn. The very ground seemed to acknowledge the unexpected harmony of their dance. The crowd remained still, a silent ring around the two dancers. The initial shock had melted into something else, something softer and more thoughtful. There was still a touch of humor in their eyes, a funny wonder at the sight of the small, limping man leading the tall, powerful woman. It was like watching a tiny tugboat guide a grand riverboat, a sight that made you smile, but also made you think. But beneath the humor, a quiet respect had taken root. They saw how Cole, despite his limp, moved with a steady grace, never faltering. They saw how Mary, usually so stiff and alone, moved with a surprising lightness, her big frame finding a rhythm with his smaller one. She wasn't just following, she was dancing. Her face, which often held a hint of sadness, was now soft, almost peaceful. The men who had laughed the loudest now watched with slack jaws. They had expected a clumsy mess, a comical spectacle. Instead, they saw something beautiful and unexpected. It wasn't a perfect dance, not like the fancy dances in the big cities, but it was real. It was honest. Mrs. Henderson, who had giggled behind her hand, now dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She saw the gentle way Cole held Mary's hand, the quiet understanding in his one eye. It was clear that he wasn't afraid of her size, and that, in turn, allowed Mary to be herself. The children, who had been ready to laugh, now watched with serious faces, sensing the importance of the moment. They saw their big Mary dancing, truly dancing for the first time. The floorboards continued their rhythmic groaning, a kind of deep bass note to the fiddle's melody. It was a funny sound, yet it fit. It was a reminder of Mary's strength, yes, but now it also spoke of Cole's steady leadership. The laughter was gone, replaced by a deep quiet, filled only with the music and the soft thud of their steps. The people in the barn weren't just watching a dance. They were watching a story unfold, a story that was changing their minds about what was possible. It was a dance that held both a gentle smile and a silent nod of approval from the entire community. As Mary and Cole continued to dance, the music seemed to wrap around them, a soft blanket of sound. The initial wonder in the crowd's eyes began to change, too. It wasn't just about the surprise of them dancing or the comical shake of the floorboards. Something deeper was happening. Cole's "I never left Mary's face" In that steady gaze, Mary saw no fear, no judgment, just a quiet understanding. It was a look that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. Her shoulders, usually held so rigidly, relaxed a little. A softness she rarely showed began to bloom on her face. A small, almost shy smile played on her lips. Cole, for his part, seemed to grow taller as they danced. His limp, though still there, became less noticeable, fading into the gentle rhythm they created together. He guided her with a delicate touch, his hand on her back a warm, steady presence. It wasn't about his strength or her strength, but about their connection. A tender feeling, like the warmth of a hearth fire on a cold night, began to spread through the barn. It started around Mary and Cole, a gentle glow that reached out to touch everyone watching. The air itself seemed to grow softer, quieter. The bright lanterns cast a mellow light, and the fiddle's melody felt less like a dance tune and more like a lullaby. The people in the crowd weren't just watching a dance. They were watching two souls find each other. They saw the way Mary's formidable presence seemed to melt under Cole's gentle attention. They saw the quiet strength in Cole that didn't need to shout or boast. It was a beautiful, unexpected pairing, like a sturdy oak finding its perfect ivy. The room, once filled with boisterous laughter and then stunned silence, now settled into a comfortable, heartfelt quiet. No one whispered, no one moved. They simply watched, their own hearts feeling a touch of the warmth that was blossoming between Mary and Cole. It was a feeling of quiet wonder, a deep respect for the simple beauty of two people connecting in a way no one thought possible. The dance wasn't just shaking the floor. It was shaking their hearts, too. The waltz continued for a few more turns, the fiddle and banjo weaving a gentle tune. Mary and Cole moved as one, their steps growing softer, the floorboards sighing rather than groaning. Then, with a final, lingering note from the fiddle, the music slowly faded away. Mary and Cole came to a gentle stop in the center of the barn. Cole still held her hand, his thumb softly tracing the back of her palm. Mary looked at him, a warmth in her eyes she hadn't known was there. She saw a quiet strength, a gentle spirit in his one blue eye. He saw a beautiful woman, strong and kind, whose smile now reached her very soul. As the last echoes of the music died, the barn fell into a silence even deeper than before. It wasn't the shocked silence from when Cole first asked Mary to dance, nor the respectful quiet that followed. This was a thoughtful silence, a moment when everyone in the room seemed to be holding their breath, each person lost in their own thoughts about what they had just seen. The men who had laughed were no longer chuckling. Their faces were serious, some looking down at their boots, others still gazing at Mary and Cole with a new understanding. They had seen something real, something that made them question their own easy jokes and fears. They had seen a kind of bravery they hadn't known existed. The women, many with tears in their eyes, simply watched. They understood the loneliness Mary must have felt and the simple beauty of Cole's unwavering kindness. They saw the happiness on Mary's face, a happiness they hadn't witnessed before. Even the children were quiet, no longer giggling or chasing each other. They sensed the importance of the moment, the quiet magic that had filled the barn. They might not have understood all of it, but they knew something special had happened. Mary and Cole stood there for a moment longer, not letting go of each other's hands. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, with the weight of new understandings. Everyone in the barn was thinking about the big woman and the small drifter, about the dance that had shaken the floorboards and, more importantly, had shaken their hearts. The music had stopped, but the feeling it created still lingered, a warm, quiet presence that changed the very air in the room. The morning sun rose, painting the Nebraska sky with soft colors, just like any other day. But this morning felt different. A quiet buzz of conversation, still laced with wonder, filled the breakfast tables in town. Everyone was talking about Mary Clancy and the drifter, Cole. The barn social had ended late, and Mary had walked home with Cole at her side, leaving the townsfolk with much to ponder. Mary woke early, as always. The memory of the dance, of Cole's steady hand, brought a new lightness to her step. She dressed, made coffee, and then headed out to tend to her ranch chores. Her gaze naturally fell on the old ranch gate. It had been sagging for weeks, the hinges rusty, a few of the wooden slats loose. She'd meant to fix it, but there was always so much to do. But as she approached, she stopped, her eyes widening in surprise. There at the gate was Cole. He was bent over, his one eye focused on the task at hand, his hat pushed back from his forehead. He hadn't asked if he could help. He hadn't been told to. He was simply there working. He had gathered some tools, a hammer, some nails, a small piece of wood from somewhere. With patient, careful movements, he was tightening the loose hinges, replacing the broken slats. The sounds of his hammer tapping against metal and wood echoed softly in the morning air. His limp was still there, a slight shift in his balance, but it didn't stop his steady work. He moved with a quiet purpose, his hands sure and strong. Mary watched him for a long moment, a lump forming in her throat. She had never had anyone just do something for her, especially not something so practical, so thoughtful. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply making things better. His actions spoke louder than any words. This wasn't a passing fancy, a dance for a night. This was a man settling in, a man who saw what needed doing and quietly did it. He looked up then, sensing her presence. His good eye met hers, and he offered a small, soft smile. He didn't say anything, didn't offer an explanation. He just smiled, a hint of morning sunlight catching his face. In that smile, and in the quiet work of his hands, Mary understood. Cole wasn't just passing through. He was staying. He was making her ranch, her life, a little bit more his own. Cole's hammer made a final, firm tap, securing the last loose slat into place. He stepped back, surveying his work with a nod of quiet satisfaction. The old gate, once sagging and tired, now stood straight and strong, ready to serve for many more years. It was a simple ranch gate, but to Mary, watching him from a few feet away, it was much more. This wasn't just a repair, it was a promise. A drifter, a man who had only known trails and temporary stops, was putting down roots. He hadn't spoken grand words of commitment, hadn't asked if he could stay. Instead, he had shown it, with the steady rhythm of his hammer, with the careful attention to a task that benefited Mary's home. Mary walked over, her boots making soft thuds on the dirt. She reached out and touched the newly mended wood, feeling its strength. "Thank you, Cole," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. Cole turned, his one eye crinkling at the corner as he smiled. "Needed fixin'," he said simply, his voice low and calm. He didn't boast, didn't look for praise. It was just a fact, plain and clear. But Mary knew it was more than that. He had seen a need, and he had filled it, not for payment, not for glory, but because he cared. This quiet act, this simple mending of a broken thing, showed that he saw her ranch not just as a place to rest, but as a place to belong. He had found his place, not by taking up space, but by making himself useful, by offering his steady hand and kind heart. The sun climbed higher, warming the Nebraska air. The wind rustled through the tall grass, a familiar song that now felt a little different, a little sweeter. Mary looked from the sturdy gate to Cole, standing beside it, his presence as solid and comforting as the mended wood. She had spent so long feeling alone, a mountain that no one dared to climb. Now, a quiet man with one eye and a limp had not only climbed it, but had started to build a home right at its base. Cole's actions spoke of a future, of mornings filled with shared tasks and quiet companionship. He had found a home, not just under Mary's roof, but in her heart, a place where his gentle strength was seen and valued. And Mary, for the first time, felt truly, completely not alone.